Welcome to the Weather Insights Podcast. I'm meteorologist Scott Pitney along with meteorologist Jeff Lindner. Jeff, good afternoon.
Hello.
We actually have two Jeffs on, a returning guest and good friend of ours, Jeff Evans, meteorologist in charge for the National Weather Service Houston Galveston office. Jeff, great to have you back. How are you doing, sir?
All right, all right. Little cool this morning, but it's warming up nicely.
Yeah, it definitely is. Definitely is. If I still played golf, I'd have that on my mind right now. It's one of those kind of days. So we are going to reminisce about the 2024 hurricane season, where we had 18 storms under what was forecasted as far as the total numbers. 11 of those, we had 18 named storms. 11 of those were hurricanes, and then five majors. But there were several records, anomalies, I guess you could say, that came out of this season. Jeff Evans, I'll start with you. What are some of your initial thoughts about this hurricane season in 2024?
Boy, it was an interesting season to be sure because it was a little bit bimodal. So, there was a lot of hype and fanfare going into the season. I mean, we had said stuff we'd almost never said before. And right out of the gate, we get Beryl, we get a major Cat 5, Southern Caribbean. Um, Obviously, Beryl had its challenges as it got towards Texas. We had our challenges as it got towards Texas. But after Beryl, I mean, the season just kind of went poof. And matter of fact, the seasonal folks were on the defensive there for August and then early September about what happened, and then boom, the switch came on, and it's going to be down a historic year. I mean, we had some storms that I think for some parts of the country are going to be very defining. North Carolina, West North Carolina is going to be, you had your before Hermine and after Hermine timeline, kind of like in Houston, how we had before and after Harvey. Um, then you had Milton. Tampa had been dodging the bullet for decades, and it looked like for a brief period of time that this was going to be it. Tampa was going to get their storm, and fortunately 20, 30 miles south on landfall and weakening as it made landfall. But a lot of tornadoes with Milton as well. So, yeah, it was really interesting. And even, we had a Cat 3 in November. It didn't really do a lot, stay down in the Gulf of Mexico. That was pretty rare as well. So those are just some of the things just kind of jump out at me. Just kind of almost two seasons.
Yeah, and you mentioned the tornadoes in Florida. Also what sticks in my mind are the large tornadoes, the number of EF3s that came out of. I think it was one of those early bands that came on shore, but I thought that was pretty unusual as well. I want to
With
ask
Milton.
Want to ask both of you guys, particularly interested in the surveys. I know you guys have done a lot of survey work together over the years. This year, you were in Florida doing survey work there. You also had survey work here in the Houston area, I would imagine, for Beryl and also the derecho, May 16th derecho. So maybe both of you guys kind of take us through the process of what those surveys are like. When do you start after the storm's gone, and what is that process like for y'all?
So there's two different kind, really. So, most of what you're referring to are the storm surge surveys. So going in after a major storm surge, those are really kind of organized and coordinated through the Hurricane Center. And you wonder why, Harris County, why they're in Florida doing it. Well, the National Weather Service does not have instrumentation to go out in the field at a specific point and get a datum level at that level. Well, here, Jeff Lindner and his team do. We have that good relationship with Jeff. And we have that good relationship with the Hurricane Center. So that's how we ended up getting kind of brought into this. So after Beryl, we spent a couple of days going down, taking a look at the surge, but also kind of documenting the wind to some degree as we go along. And then our big effort this year was after Hermine. So, Hermine was a major surge event. We knew it was bad, but until you get in there and document it, the Surge Center, the National Hurricane Center Surge Unit in the past, prior to about 2020, they were very dependent on the NOAA gauges and different things to try to glean out those values. But with what we've been able to do is with surge is what we kind of do with tornadoes and wind is get out there in between data sites and can actually get these measurements for them live. Um, and it's always hard, it's hard work, it's dirty work, but it's fascinating. I think Jeff, what was it, 17.1? I think was our highest value above NAVD 88 with Hermine. So it was a significant surge into the Big Bend. I know that Helene, most of the news was as the wind went across Georgia and up into the Carolinas and all that heavy rainfall and the dams breaking in the Carolinas. And I think I heard Mike Brennan say this was the most deaths from wind with a landfalling hurricane in the U.S. since the 60s. So a significant amount of inland wind impacts. But that surge from Helene was dire. It was a beast. And this is an area that had been hit twice before in the prior 13 months. They had Adelia,
Yeah.
and then just prior, I think it was at Debbie earlier, just like a month prior to that. So these folks kind of were aware of the threat, and they got out. It was like when we surveyed after Laura in 2020. People got out. They knew this was a surge risk, and so thank God they did. There would have been a lot of probably dozens of fatalities in that surge zone. Um, and the wind, and then the wind, you mentioned the derecho, those surveys are a little bit different. So those are mostly organized by the local National Weather Service office ourselves. Um, and then we use our staff to do that. And obviously, we loop in Jeff Lindner, especially if it impacts City, Houston, and Harris County, because he's going to be heavily involved in that as well. And we get out and those we actually have tools on our phone, and I can look at the wind damage, and I can look back at what was done, and there's estimates on what kind of wind would cause that kind of damage, and so that's how we can kind of estimate the wind speeds on that. The derecho is a little different than a tornado because derecho has more duration. Tornado winds are more instantaneous, so you have to be careful with how you apply those tools. But that's where our expertise comes in and evaluating that and coming up with those, 100-ish mile an hour winds in a few spots there with the derecho. Jeff, did you want to expand on anything on that, those survey efforts?
I think that you hit it well. I think what kind of I don't know if it really surprised me or not was, when we went into the Florida Panhandle and some of those towns. So we went into there's around Steenhatchee and then up towards Keaton Beach. I mean, the damage we saw in those areas was equal to some of the worst damage we've ever surveyed. Michael, Ian, Laura, all of those, which were very, entire structures just gone. Slabs left if they even had a slab.
From
Um,
surge.
from surge and
Wow.
and and I think that got lost, like you said, in the aftermath up in what happened in North Carolina and Georgia. And that Florida Big Bend area is just not very populated. These are, oh, I don't know, 1,000, 2,000 type population towns or smaller. And so it's not like what we saw down in Southwest Florida or in Lake Charles. And really that area just never really got, I think, the exposure down there. But it was really bad. And for those that haven't been to the Big Bend of Florida, it's not the white sand beaches there. It's very marshy. It's very much like the Upper Texas coast even. Um, and then a little bit with the barrel survey, we did the storm surge 3 days for Beryl. Beryl was the second highest surge we've seen here since Ike.
Yeah.
We had Ike, which was 11, 12 feet in some portions on the upper part of the bay, up around the Battleship Tech, up around the Monument Inn and where the Battleship Texas used to be. We're talking 7, 8 feet up there. And so, not a lot of damage happened from the surge here, but it was some high water that came in with Beryl. And, if you ask me about the season, I kind of agree with Jeff. You, had we not had the quiet period in August and September, I think Texas would have been dealt a lot of potential threats this year because we had a lot of Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico tracks. I mean, it was a very active Gulf of Mexico. 5 U.S. landfalling hurricanes on the Gulf Coast. The record is 6 back in 1886, and so it was a very busy year for the Gulf Coast. And minus Beryl, Texas really lucked out with Francine, kind of getting in that mid-late September timeframe where it kind of comes up to the coast and then hooks off to the right toward Louisiana, and of course everything else going into Florida. But had we have been active like we thought we would be in that August, first half of September, I really think Texas would have been threatened, and we'd have
Yeah,
probably different conversations right now going on.
no
Yeah.
doubt, especially because the kind of steering currents at that part of the summer were right into us still, and that was our
Yeah.
big worry. But for a variety of reasons, the waves couldn't really get going off of Africa, and you could look at dust, and you could look at the tracks of the short waves coming off Africa from the steering flow and things of that nature. Whatever they want to end up resolving on, it saved Texas from what could have been a really, really disastrous season.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see when they dig in deeper to why we had that big void in the season. What the findings are. I know there's a lot of theories. You mentioned the waves and other things too. The volcanoes and all kinds of things going on right now. So it'll take some time to sort all that out. You mentioned the storm surge. So I know you guys because I've talked to each one of you about the surveys individually, and I don't think people really understand how hard you guys work. First of all, you drive from Texas to Florida for the surveys there, and then you get there. Um, and you're in some very remote areas. I mean, places where people are questioning who you are and why you're there. There's wildlife to deal with, snakes, alligators. I mean, you guys have any stories to share
We got lots of stories to share, but I don't know how
Can we
many.
share them? Can we share
Yeah,
them?
it's more what audience we want to share it with. But no, it's you're right. It's long, hard work. And it's not like we just go up and we find a mark and you just measure it and move on. I mean,
right?
there's a lot of hunting for these marks. You're getting into structures that are suspect, and there are people that, you always want to get permission, ideally. You don't want to go into someone's property. We get it. But when you go into these desolated, hard struck areas, there's nobody there.
Yeah,
Uh, you want to get in, get a mark, but sometimes somebody shows up, they get upset, and you have to explain what you're doing. That's part of it. I mean, it can happen with tornado surveys too. I've had people come in and basically charge me because what am I doing in their mom's house, or like, hey, I'm always wearing a National Weather Service shirt, and so I'm just here trying to see what happened and see how strong the winds were in the tornado. Or in this case, we're just wanting to measure the height of the surge at this location. We explain to them it really does help them long term. It helps with insurance and other things that we can document from a government agency that this was water damage and this was a salt water damage, and this is how high it was at the property, and we give them what that number is, what that value is. But yeah, we've seen snakes, alligators. You don't want to step on sharp glass. You have to watch out for wires. Usually the electricity is well off, but you just can't take that for granted. We've had dead wires wrapped around the axle that we've had to back up and try to unwind. Yeah,
That's my fault. That was my fault.
we've had situations where you have to be I don't know, maybe nimble and willing to risk yourself to get up and get some values. I got up to second floor, some locations. It's just like, I don't really know. Don't tell my wife I got up here.
Yeah.
But that's where you find some of these values. A lot of these, especially on the coast, these are elevated homes. So a lot of times the wooden stairwells get washed away. And you think, well, I think there's water got into that structure, and so we try to find a way to get in there if we can. What we found along Keaton Beach and some of the areas with Hermine was that those houses were so high, above 20 feet above the ground. Fortunately, the water didn't get in there, but there was no way to get a mark. So I don't think we were able to capture the highest mark actually with Hermine because there just wasn't a place left. Anything that would have left a mark on it washed away. But it's muddy and stinky. Laura was probably the foulest one to survey. Mud and everything had just deep mud in it. You're sliding around and like, thank God I'll just hope I don't fall, because there's no bathrooms, there's no showers, there's no gasoline. for a 2 hour drive.
Mm.
For Hermine,
Yeah.
we had to stay in Tallahassee. It was a 2.5 hour drive just to get to the starting point for that day for the surgery. So these are long days. We start at 6 a.m. We get back at 7 or 8 at night. And you got to turn around and do it again. But it's one of those things. If we don't do it, it's not going to get done. And we can't. Not just anybody can go do it. The Corps, U.S. Corps, they have some teams that can go out and they can help collect values as well. But I think we have that trust with the surge unit, and so they really, if they can, they want to try to get us there. I know they were trying to get us, or at least Jeff and Jeremy, for after Milton, but it just couldn't happen because sometimes we have our own conflicts, and that's so far. We just don't have time or aren't able to get down there.
Yeah, I'll the nastiest survey that I've ever done was Ida. So Jeff didn't go on the Ida survey. This was south of New Orleans a couple years ago, and they're down south of New Orleans. There's a lot of these what they call back levees, and so they're small levees. They're 4 or 5 feet. They're easily overtopped. The problem is when the water goes down, there's no way to get the water out from behind these levees, and so the water just sits there, and it turns into this. I don't know what you want to call it, but it's gross. And we had to slodge our way through some of these back levee
Mm.
areas. And I won't forget. I mean, we had waders on, and we had I call it sludge. We were up to waist deep in this sludge, and it smelled awful. Helene was in October. It wasn't hot. It wasn't horrible. But when we did Laura and Ida, it was late August, and it's every bit of a late August day on the Gulf Coast. And um, that's one of the things I think sometimes pictures don't do justice is the smell, just
Yeah.
the awful. I mean, you can literally when you drive into the storm surge inundation area, you can smell it. It'll come through the AC in the car, and you're like, "Yep, that's seawater inundation."
Yeah.
It has a smell, and it's dead,
It's
rotting,
it's
decaying matter.
it's decaying drywall. It's refrigerators, freezers. It's really foul. And another thing from this year, we have never seen the mosquitoes we saw with after barrel.
Mm.
The mosquitoes after barrel in that survey were unbelievable. I mean, it would just be instant. And I don't
Oh
care
yeah,
what spray we tried, didn't seem to phase them at all. I mean,
yeah,
we were all three of us just getting eaten alive.
yeah. Yeah, it was
Well, compared
horrible.
to the
That
last,
was the worst I've ever dealt with mosquitoes of the west end of Galveston Island after Barrel. I've never seen mosquitoes like that in my life.
well, we finally had some rain this summer, so
Yeah,
I mean, outside of barrels, so they
right.
had a little more breeding ground. So going to the wind events just for a minute. I know you guys have surveyed tornadoes. You're looking down for touchdown points, and then there's some a narrow width, generally speaking, with a tornado. But with the derecho, you had this wide area. So how do you go about surveying wind when you're driving into an area? Are you just kind of driving down roads and kind of looking for stuff, or is there a systematic approach? Talk about that a bit.
You try to make it as systematic as you can. You don't want to just go wandering around blindly. So what we typically do before I leave the office is we show a swath of where we think the damage is. We typically have a radar loops that we can look at relative to different points on the map. So we can kind of have a sense of what the radar was looking like at specific points. And then you just have to read, you read what you're seeing in the field, and you have to have an open mind. You don't want to be the person that issued the tornado warning, and then you're just going to see tornado everywhere you go because you issued a tornado warning. So you have to kind of let that part of it go and just read the data. And that's what we did with the derecho. We did have several small tornadoes up when it first started in the Waller and even the far northwest Harris. But after that, it was pretty much straight line wind, and you can kind of tell um, by the width of it, by the direction of it. There were a few areas that we were wondering because maybe the most of the damage was kind of a west northwest to east southeast distribution as that system came through and started bowing out. But we had a few power poles and stuff that maybe had a little bit of south to north lay to them. But I think a lot of that might have been inflow winds. or there were a lot of complexities. I mean, we think of a bow echo as this like bulldozer of wind, but it doesn't work that way. There are eddies and there are microbursts within that. And that's, it's just almost like a series of microbursts. But it takes skill. It takes a little bit of experience. The same thing with fighting high water marks. It's not that anybody can just go out and do it immediately. But you do have to just stay oriented and kind of see where things are laying. I don't know, Jeff, you want to expand a bit on that? But that's
No. I think, I mean, when the dread show was a rough one. Obviously, there was a lot of ground to cover. The other thing was we had pockets of significant damage, structural damage in multiple locations. So, we had Spring Branch, kind of Timber Grove, 610, 290 area, and then of course in downtown Houston with the high-rise buildings. It gets really complicated when you get downtown with the wind flow through the buildings and all that. So you see a lot of weird stuff in high-rise areas. But like Jeff said, we saw a few locations was like, oh man, it looked like it tried to close off, but I don't think it ever did. I mean, this was a big, broad,
yeah.
wind maxima that came through. And
With
but
microbursts, I
yeah,
think they're just burst as it came through.
yeah. I mean, it's just the director was just a lot of ground to cover. We spent a half a day on it, along with other things. I mean, surveys can get complicated very quickly because you can get pulled in a lot of different directions. You can get stuck talking with people. You want to talk to people, but you also want to move along, especially on the tornado type surveys. And then the second part is there's this interest now with the TV media, potentially even elected officials, and you
Yeah,
get pulled into doing interviews and news conferences and stuff like that. And so,
especially
what
close to
well,
Houston.
yeah. What we think is a straightforward 2 hour survey ends up taking an entire day. I mean, we saw that with the Pasadena tornado too a couple years ago. Is Evans especially? Every time we turn a block, it was another interview, it was another question. Oh, emergency management wants to meet with you, or a fire person wants to meet with. I mean, it took us 8, 9 hours to move not that far. I think what did it take y'all? 3 days to do the Pasadena tornado?
Pretty much,
Yeah.
yeah. And at some point, I kind of had to pull myself out of the survey and just deal with the different media requests. Um, but we had that kind of real brief touchdown up in Northwest Harris County when we hit that Firestone. I don't know when that was, like in early April or March. I can't remember the date of that. Um,
That was the one in Katy, right?
Yeah.
yes, yeah, and
Yeah, it was in
so
Katy.
that what you would think would be a really short survey, but it was press conference after press conference after press conference. And so, we spent, I don't know, 2.5 hours, 3 hours at one spot. And at one point I just had to break away. Like I'm not even able to survey here because everybody wants a different, camera time and the politicals. If for the derecho, we ended up, the mayor was having a little press conference right in the downtown. There was the press conference between the mayor and the judge at Transtar. These things take time. And for the derecho and the Pasadena tornado in January 23, we do break that up into teams from the Weather Service. We might have 3 different teams taking different tracks, different parts of the track.
Yeah. Jumping back to the hurricanes, a minute, hurricane discussion. So we had you touched on it briefly, Jeff Evans, the kind of the forecasting nightmare with Beryl, the landfall forecast nightmare. It started in northern Mexico and it just kept creeping up the coast till it finally made landfall in Matagorda, and then you had Helene, which was one of the most accurate as far as where it was going before a low even closed. What are your thoughts on how the models performed this year and versus maybe how they performed 5, 10 years ago?
So I'll start and I'll hand it off to Jeff. I think with Beryl, the model struggled, certainly, especially. And I think there are a number of reasons for that. I think that it really, the models were struggling with the intensity. And, so because Beryl had been a Cat 5 and weakened quite a bit, and it was going to go across the Yucatan, it was going to be more, integrity of the storm was going to fall apart. but those Western Gulf storms, we have a history of that. We had Rita, Ike, a number of them that kept going to the right. And this is going to be another along those lines that it just kept going right. Harvey was an exception to that. Harvey didn't do that. So it's not always just because of the Western Gulf, it's going to go to the right like that. But the models really struggle with that. And then you throw in the holiday weekend. You know, 4th of July was that Thursday and made landfall, I think, the following Monday. But a lot of people had, they had seen a forecast down into Mexico, gone on their holiday, come back on Saturday and Sunday, and now suddenly it's much bigger impact for them, perhaps. And then the other aspect with Beryl was really getting everyone's mind wrapped around what these gusts were going to look like and what a Cat 1 hurricane can really bring, even to inland areas. It was an eye-opening experience for a lot of Houston. Obviously, the power, the infrastructure, power became the story. I think the heat deaths might have been 50 or more after the storm, as we lost power and the extensive angst about getting power restored. So I think there were a lot of lessons learned there. On the other side of the Gulf, I think the hurricane forecast did pretty well this year. As you mentioned, Helene was was almost right on. Although I will say, if you lived in Tallahassee, you were a little bit more afraid than ended up going, farther west there. So I think that there was a little bit of a window of opportunity where the agency was a little bit too far left there. But with Milton and Hermine, the forecasts really weren't terrible. But the problem with Helene is similar to that we dealt with Houston and our inland impacts with the wind. Even magnitudes more was getting people in the Southern Appalachians to comprehend what this could bring to them. And we can say it. The Weather Office was saying historical flooding, catastrophic flooding, something people have never seen in their lifetime. I don't, like we dealt with the Harvey, people didn't quite grasp what it was, how bad it could really be. They had never seen anything like that. And that's a tough thing as a meteorologist to try to message. We still have a lot of work to do with the forecasting and really getting people to understand. You got to accept some false alarm, and you have to, be listening to the science and listening to these folks. We're not out there just trying to get clicks on our webpage. We're not saying this to scare people. If we don't put a word, if we put wording like, life threatening, we really mean it. We need people to pay attention to that. Jeff, you want to expand a little bit on that?
Well, yeah. Beryl, we were playing catch up with Beryl from the time it hit the Yucatan, really, here in Texas, in Southeast Texas. I mean, Evans, you and I talked. I was out of town. You and I talked on that Friday. I decided to come back. And even on Saturday, we were kind of like, yeah, it's a tropical storm. It wasn't really strengthening. It was disorganized. It was heading towards Port O'Connor, Matagorda Bay. But it was Sunday morning, was that kind of realization of, boy, this is going to be a little rough when it comes to the wind side of things. And just to be clear, because there's still this narrative out there, Beryl was a Category 1 hurricane at landfall, and in the metro area, for the most part, we had sustained tropical storm force winds. We had hurricane wind gusts up to 75, 85 miles an hour, but all the damage we saw was from that. Okay, because there's this narrative that, oh, Beryl had to be stronger, and it's just not true. It
No.
was a fast moving storm. It brought the winds inland. It was strengthening at landfall. Strengthening hurricanes at landfall are always going to bring impacts further inland. It came right up across the metro area in that eastern right front quadrant, and so it was kind of the perfect setup for bad things to happen. One thing I'll say, and I think the dust has maybe settled now a little bit with the whole power thing. I don't really understand some of the power situation that we had, and the backlash toward not only Centerpoint but also the people that came from other parts of the country to help get our power back up and going. Um, you know, a million people restored in 2 days and 48 hours is tremendous. If you look back at what happened with Hurricane Ike back in 2008, we're talking 14 to 20 days to get everybody restored. The power was restored here in roughly 8 to 9 days. I get it. It's hot, it's humid. and all that type of stuff. But that's what happens here in July and August when we have hurricanes. And I think there was a little bit of a push, maybe because we had just lost so much power with the derecho that, oh, we can't, how are we going through this again so quickly? And I think there was a little bit of unfairness there on the side of Centerpoint. Now, could the communication have been better? The tracking of the power and how it came back up been better? Yeah, there's definitely something to be said about the communication of what's happening. But the linemen and the folks that came from outside of this area to get the power back up did an incredible job to get that done. And I'll echo what Evan said also about North Carolina. I know some people up in Western North Carolina, and I asked them point blank. I said, "Did y'all know it was going to be this bad?" And the answer was no. And they said, we knew we were going to get a lot of rain, but they couldn't wrap their head around the impacts. And I think that's where we continue to struggle. I don't think anybody in Houston didn't know Hurricane Beryl was coming, but they couldn't wrap their head around the impacts of what that meant. And it was the same thing in Western North Carolina is we knew we were going to get a lot of rain, but we didn't expect the mudslides. We didn't
Yeah.
expect the roads, the bridges to be washed away, and the cell phone towers, and the power, and all this, and the infrastructure to be so damaged that I couldn't move around. I was trapped. I didn't expect that. And then the other thing was I didn't expect the wind to be that great that far inland in Western North Carolina, the higher elevations. And I said this the other day in an interview actually about something, and I said we can produce a perfect 100% forecast, 100% right. But if it's not communicated correctly and the people on the other end aren't understanding what that means to them, what the impacts are going to be, what does it matter if it's 100% right? And that's the biggest challenge we have right now is not actually getting the forecast right. In Barrow, we had some challenges with that. But you talked about Helene. I mean, it was a really good forecast, but we had the highest fatality since Katrina from a landfalling hurricane. And so it's getting those impacts portrayed out there correctly. And this brings up the question of when does the meteorology stop? When do we stop being a forecaster and telling you what the weather's going to do and try to focus on all the impacts because I can't even begin to wrap my head around all the potential impacts from a weather system. I don't even sometimes know. I mean, we know the high ones, right? Power, travel, commodities, cell phones, stuff like that, water. We know those are going to be impacted. But there's all these other impacts out there that kind of go into this stuff now. And and Jeff is right. We lost more people in the aftermath of Beryl. And there was a lot of heat. There was a lot of heat illness and heat fatalities, but there was a lot of fatalities. I think it was eight or nine. I think we had 16 total. Eight or nine were from people falling. I mean, they're getting up on their roofs, they're trying to cut up tree limbs, and they're falling or they're getting hurt. And we're losing more people in the aftermath of these storms than from the actual storm itself. And so, we could spend an entire hour trying to unpack the social side of all of this stuff. But the last thing I'll say is on this topic, because I had this conversation with a couple of emergency managers, is when we say you have to pay attention to the forecast every day in hurricane season, multiple times a day, we really mean it. And Beryl was a classic example that it was changing. The forecast was changing. What was one thing Saturday morning was different Saturday evening, was different Sunday morning, and you're not always going to have 4 or 5 days to get ready for these things. And I think a lot of people blew off Beryl because honestly, Beryl was about the same strength Nicholas was back in 21 when it made landfall. It's a
Yeah.
different track.
Yeah.
And we can't always assume that the same storm back whenever is going to have the same impacts. And that was the challenge we faced with Beryl. Even with some of the folks I was dealing with, it was trying to get the point across to guys. This is going to be a wind storm. And Sunday, I know Evans and I were both doing briefings. We're kind of almost pleading.
Yeah.
This is wind, guys. This is wind. A lot of wind is coming, and people just kind of shrugged it off. Um, and so I don't know how to really work on getting those impacts across to folks so they make the right preparation. They feel prepared because I think a lot of people come back after the storm like I wasn't prepared for this. I didn't know this was going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you nailed it. Jeff Lindner, it is a social question, and yeah, you could unpack this stuff for hours and hours on end. You can tell people, like going back to Harvey, hey, it's going to rain 20 inches. Okay, well, what do I do with that information? Do I hunker down? Do I evacuate? Do I put sandbags around my house? I think that's the other issue too, is what to actually do with that information. Those people in North Carolina, a lot of them, by the time they were hearing catastrophic flooding, life-threatening, they had already had a lot of rain previously. And some of them, they are in remote areas, and the roads were blocked to get out. And so they couldn't do anything. But
Well,
yeah,
there were a number of people in Western North Carolina that took the forecast seriously
yeah,
and they didn't leave.
yeah,
So I don't want to overlook that fact. It wasn't
right.
like everybody, nobody took action. So the messaging was out there. Some people,
Yeah,
maybe the more risk averse people, and I think that's one thing that individuals have to assess for themselves is how risk averse am I? How much am I willing to put myself at risk, my family at risk? That risk acceptance is going to vary, right? I mean, a single guy that's 28 is going to have a total different risk assessment than if you're 28, you're married, and you've got two, kids under the age of 5. Total different assessment of what kind of risk you want. Same thing with the power situation. If you have the means, go grab one of these generators on sale over the holidays. Have something so that to help yourself in case this were to happen again. There's no guarantee this won't happen again. That we won't have another derecho. That we won't have a worse hurricane. Alicia in '83. I can't imagine what that's going to bring today. It's going to be magnitudes worse than what we got with Beryl. Much stronger system. The winds were much stronger, sustained and gusts. The infrastructure, it's going to, people are going to be out without power for more than just 7 days. I can almost guarantee that if we get another Alicia strike. So again, and that's the social science challenge is that, we're a federal agency, Jeff's working for a county. We're trying to message everybody, but these are really individual decisions. We're
yeah,
trying to put the data out there so an individual can make the best decision. But I don't know everybody's situation. I can't get to have 7 million people go through one at a time and tell them what each individual is going to need to do. Well, yeah, you're near the bayou. You're not. You've got trees on your line. You're going to lose power. You're probably okay. That's something we have to take assessment for ourselves.
yeah,
So
yeah.
not to blow this open any more than we already got it, but what do you think about seasonal forecast, Evans? You and I kind of talked during the season about how we were on the fence on it. But what do you think this year? And I know Scott has some questions about seasonal forecast, and what we mean by that is the numbers. Everybody talks about the numbers at the start of the hurricane season, and you know, after this year, I know, it's going to end up being close to what was expected. And we had
Right.
this kind of late season rally, if you will, for it. But I don't know. I just, what do you think?
I'm not a big fan. I never have. Because I think, I mean, I get it. If you just want to create a narrative going into every season for people to get prepared, yeah, I get it. And it drives that narrative. Maybe it helps insurance companies as far as, having more cash on hand on bigger seasons. I don't know. But for the average person, seasonal forecast should be relatively meaningless. We could have had a quiet year, could have been Beryl and the whole season shut down. It still would have been really, really bad for people around Houston. So, I mean, just because the seasons we come out with low numbers, we're not telling people to just check out. So I don't know. I think it's a media creation. I think that people like to talk about it. I think it gets attention. And Jeff and I, that we give a lot of public talks, and it's the first state question I get when I'm a meteorologist is A, what station do I work for? And then B, what's the hurricane season going to be like?
Right.
That's what people ask. Well, sometimes 3, what's your thoughts on global warming? But I won't even go into that. But those are the kind of questions that immediately come to grips. And really on the last 2, global warming and the hurricane season, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what the season is or what my views are or thoughts are. It's really going to come down to you as a person. What are you going to do about any of this?
Yeah. Lindner, any any follow-up thoughts?
No, I don't. I know, if I kind of agree. I get asked all the time, well, how bad is the season going to be? And if you want high numbers, does high numbers equal bad? The answer is no. But I think to most people, high numbers equals bad, right? But it's only bad if you get hit, if your particular area is impacted, and I think that once you start trying to once you start going down that road, you can kind of see people's eyes glaze over,
Yeah.
and you know, I've just started kind of, is it going to be bad? And I'm like, yes, it's going to be bad. Like this year was easy for
It
all of
was.
us to kind of come out the gate in May and June and just like, yeah, it's going to be horrible. It's probably going to be the worst thing ever. And we sort of verified on that. Here a lot of people are going to remember this season because we got hit. But if you're in Corpus Christi or Brownsville or
New
South Florida
Orleans. Yeah.
or New Orleans,
Yeah.
you're like, okay, yeah, it was a hurricane season, and yeah, okay, it wasn't Katrina level or Rita level or anything like that. And so I agree. I don't. We are fascinated as society with the seasonal forecast and the numbers and all that stuff. And I think what's interesting, and Evans and I talked about this kind of during the lull in August, is you know what's these seasonal forecasts have been done for 20, 25, 30 years or whatever, especially with Colorado State. And I think there's these kind of overarching themes that will get you there 85, 90% of the time, and then there's going to be these maybe sub-seasonal um attributes that are happening out there that aren't really included in the forecast that can really throw a wrench in your season. And I think we sort of saw that this year. Again, it's hard to blow them apart when they kind of, in the end, it worked out okay. But if that lull in August and September would have continued, there'd be a lot of questions right
Oh, yeah.
now about what went on. And I think there's some valid questions about what is going on in August, because we saw the same thing in 23 too.
Hmm.
August of 23 was very quiet in the Atlantic basin. And it's not just the Atlantic. You're seeing the same thing in the Pacific, the West and the East Pacific. And so it's not just the Atlantic basin that is quiet in the kind of the peak of the Northern Hemisphere hurricane season. And so are there some other factors now that need to be kind of looked at in these seasonal forecasts that are at play here? That's just not because if you heard it at the start of the season, it's the Atlantic is boiling hot. It's going to be La Nina. We're super wet in Africa and all these things. I mean, it was just everything was 100% go. And then you come to August and you're like, what in the world's going on here? We couldn't even get a tropical wave to move across the Atlantic basin. People, oh, the tropical waves are too far north. Okay, well, what happens when they get to the Gulf? They still weren't developing, when they were getting over into the Caribbean and the Gulf. And so there's something there's some things going on out there. I don't think we 100% understand on this, and I think that plays into some of the seasonal forecast stuff. Um, but yeah, I know Scott has the question all the time of who uses this? Who uses the seasonal forecast? And I know insurance does to
Yeah.
some degree, but I don't know who else actually physically uses it.
No, and it's interesting too because this year it continues a streak of hyperactive Gulf of Mexico. We had 5 landfalling hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico this year. I think the record's only at 6 or 7. So I mean that this ranks up there as one of the most active years again. The Gulf of Mexico. We again had a major hurricane, and even a Cat 4, Cat 5 make landfall in the Gulf of Mexico. That's, I don't know, like 6 out of 7 years or 7 out of 7 years. I mean, it's, you look back historically, a Cat 4 making landfall in the Gulf of Mexico was a 1 in 8, 1 in 10 year type of thing. And it's every year now. So I don't know what's going on there. If it's a pattern, if it's going to break at some point and it'll go back to where it was, how we were growing up, or if this is the new norm. But those Gulf water temperatures are really extreme, and they're at record levels, and they've been that way seemingly for a while, for years now. Again, is that our new norm? I don't know, but it's something that you just can't discount it as flukes when it's 7 years in a row here.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I'll share this one little bit of information for our listeners. After we got back from the tropical conference in April, I said, you know what? I better check out my own hurricane supplies. And they do have hurricane kits, backpacks on Amazon, and they're pretty handy. They have a list of everything that's in there. And so I got mine. And then the derecho blew through, and I actually used a hand crank flashlight
Hey,
that
glad you
night.
had it. Yeah, I mean,
So
glad-
you never know. You never know. Guys,
yeah,
any last thoughts before we wrap this up?
no, I mean, I'm glad we made it through as good as we did. It certainly could have been a lot worse.
Yeah.
As we've been talking about, had that pattern stayed active in August and September, we would have a whole different conversation right now. And the next thing is get ready for winter. We've had 3 winters in a row where we've had an Arctic snap. We've had temperatures in the 20s, 3 winters in a row, at least in one single snap there. Obviously, February 21 was the one that comes to everyone's mind. But the subsequent 2 winters, heck, last year it was Martin Luther King holiday. We had that snap. So just because we're in a warm winter doesn't mean we don't need to be prepared for that. We could have some hopefully short range power outages with that if that were to happen. But we live in Southeast Texas. Weather's always going to be something we got to keep an eye on. We don't really have just a break where weather's just we can breathe easy and relax. That being said, we can do that over the next week. So
Get your generators.
yeah, and don't ask about a white Christmas anymore. It's almost a guarantee it's not going to happen here.
Oh
Not
gosh, Evans.
I'm not trying to be a ball humbug. I'm just trying to share the information.
Yeah, we don't actually create the weather. Yeah,
No.
because sometimes, but no, I think for the hurricane season, I think there was some realizations for a lot of people of what can happen, what 60, 70 mile an hour winds can do. We've seen it twice, with the derecho and then also with Beryl. And obviously Beryl was much more widespread, a lot more impacts across the bigger area than the derecho. But kind of that realization, okay, we talk about people not understanding. Well, I hope there's some comprehension now of what 120 mile an hour winds would do. It's going to be bad. Like I don't know how else to explain it. It's going to be bad. And Evans is right. Your power's not coming back on in 4 or 5 days if you get 120 mile an hour winds. And so kind of the expectations, managing expectations, making sure people are looking at the forecast. I think some of the challenges in Southeast Texas, we just have so many people now that live here, and the different aspects of where people live. And luckily we didn't have to do this with Barrow, but we didn't even have to deal with an evacuation. I mean, we haven't had to deal with an evacuation here since Hurricane Ike. We had a little bit of an evacuation with Laura, but really since Hurricane Ike. And how many people have moved here that never even been through that, and understand evacuation zones and all that kind of stuff, and who needs to leave and who needs to stay and everything like that. And then something that's probably overarching that goes well beyond the hurricane season is just this, like we kind of talked about, is this explanation of impacts based on what the weather forecast is. Evans and I do this a lot in briefings, but not everybody gets a briefing. I mean, we spend 15, 20 minutes on a briefing call with decision makers and elected officials and stuff like that. And we go over what we anticipate the impacts to be. But I don't necessarily, see that being widespread. TV meteorologists kind of give you the forecast and they kind of get into the impacts, right? Like, we're expecting heavy rain. Well, we could see some street flooding or we could see some bayou flooding. So it kind of gets into it, but I think people they want more detailed impacts, and where is that line between the forecast and that. And the last thing is always being prepared, and this is being prepared for anything. It doesn't have to be a hurricane. I deal with folks who they're so focused on hurricane season. Like, only bad things can happen between June and November. And I said, we can flood 12 months out of the year here. We have. I mean, one of our worst floods ever was in December of 1935. December. we can have winter storms and ice storms that knock out power and all this type of stuff, wildfire, chemical incidents, shelter in
Tornadoes in
place,
January.
Yep.
tornadoes in January. I mean, we can have all of these things any time of the year. And so it's this mindset here that it's only hurricane season that bad things happen. And that's just not the case. And so we always have to kind of be prepared here. We got to have, some basic things on hand that if you do lose power or communications, the cell and stuff like that, that you can get by for 2 or 3 days because that can happen really any month out of the year here in Southeast Texas. And so, I always like to leave on the upbeat notes, like that. And Evans crushed everybody's dreams of White Christmas. Um, but
I got to get it out there.
I know.
hey,
What
at least
model
you'll be
was
able
he
to get
looking
around,
at?
right?
That's
I
pretty
gotta,
far out.
you got to rip the Band-Aid off quickly.
Man, man, you're good, Jeff Evans. That's good. That's some long range prediction there. But yeah, as meteorologists, all we can do is communicate, and we'll keep on working on getting better at communication. But we can't take the action for everybody. That
No.
eventually has to come down to like you said, Jeff Evans. You're communicating to 7 million people, but you gotta take the action yourself. So when
And
it
you have to have that level of trust. If you're just
yeah
going to really distrust scientists or government officials that much, um, you know, you got to expect the worst in that situation. Then, if you're just going to just kind of wing it on your own, we're not up here just making this stuff up. I mean, our jobs are a lot easier when it's a day like today and there's nothing going on. Believe me. So when there's something that's threatening to Southeast Texas, I mean, we are doing briefings after briefings after briefings. A lot of conversations, a lot of stress. We don't take this stuff lightly.
yeah and we're not just talking to the people that are moving down here that are new, that never have been through a hurricane or a tornado. We're talking to everybody that have lived here 25, 30 years, because as we know, all the storms are different.
Yeah.
I've never been through an earthquake, thank goodness. Don't ever want to, but I guarantee if I moved to an area that had frequent earthquakes, I'd want to find out everything I know and everything I need to do to prepare. And that's all you can do is
Right.
prepare and be ready. So
And as you mentioned just there, the next severe storm's not going to be a derecho necessary. The next hurricane is not going to be another Beryl. It's not going to be another Harvey. They all bring certain different hazards with them. Each storm. I think we're going to have some post-Beryl paranoia, so to speak, about everybody. Every system is going to be another Beryl for us. It just doesn't work that way. We went that after Harvey. Every storm is going to be another 50-inch flood. No, they don't all work that way. But that's what we do. What we do. That's why we do these podcasts. So we can talk about all this.
all right, well, we'll wrap this one up. Jeff Evans, thanks for being on. Great to chat with you again, as always. Jeff Lindner, thank you, sir. And just want to remind all of our listeners that you can keep up with the latest podcasts and weather briefings on our Weather Insights YouTube channel. Make sure you're subscribed and turn on those notifications. Also, check out our blog on our Weather Insights website. Take care, guys.
All right. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas.